Are you a 3PL spending more time and money than you'd like recruiting and onboarding logistics roles? Then it's time to check out MoLo Solutions Group, the leaders in nearshore logistics staffing. Located right next door in Mexico, they have access to the freight talent you need. From carrier sales to tracking and tracing and everything in between, they can do the heavy lifting for you. So if you're ready to get your time back and want to move fast, check out MoLo Solutions Group. Visit gorapido.com to get started today. Have you heard about Bitfreighter and the EDI revolution? Bitfreighter helps companies automate communication with their freight partners through unlimited messaging and quoting. Traditional providers can't say that. The Bitfreighter team is also available 24/7 and responds immediately by phone, email, or yes, even text. Legacy providers can't say that either. So if you want to scale your operations to save time and money, come join the EDI revolution with us. Visit bitfreighter.com to get started today. Hello, and welcome to the Bootstrapper's Guide to Logistics, the podcast highlighting founders doing it the way that doesn't get a lot of attention. We're here to change that by sharing their stories and inspiring others to take the leap.
It's a roller coaster ride. You might ultimately fail.
That's when I kind of knew I was onto something.
It was very hard.
It truly is building a legacy.
The more life you live, the more wisdom you have.
Because we are where we're supposed to be, kind of answering the call.
Don't shoulder entrepreneurship on your own.
I'm your host, Nate Schutz. Let's build something together from the ground up. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. We get to have a unique conversation with a founder this week who is at a novel place in his own founder journey. It's Stephan Mathis, one of the co-founders of MoLo, now an exited founder, sold the business successfully, and is at a pit stop of life and on his entrepreneurial journey. And so we're going to take this chance to reflect on the journey so far, pick his brain on what might be next for him, and really seek to understand what that process is of, or has been like, of starting something from nothing all the way through to selling and then looking backwards at it in real time, because this is fairly recent news. So after that intro, nice to meet you. Nice to see you. Why don't we start at the beginning of your logistics journey? How'd you get into it, and where did you start?
Man, I stumbled upon logistics. And first off, thanks for having me on. I've been watching your show and it's edging to ask you to be on the show and share my story. So thanks for having me. But honestly, stumbled into logistics. I didn't know much at all about it. I was 22 years old, living in Wrigleyville in Chicago. I actually met a guy at a bar, and he was working at Coyote at the time. And he was like, we just started chopping it up about, entry-level jobs out of college. And I had no idea what a freight brokerage was, but he was making good money. And I was in my first job that I didn't really like. And he's like, you should check it out. You seem pretty personable. So he referred me to Coyote, and I got an interview.
What was your first actual role then? Were you doing carrier sales, customer sales?
Yeah, carrier sales was my first gig. Prior to that, I was a valet manager at a kind of schwanky country club up in the north suburbs of Illinois. And part of my customer service background kind of came from taking care of people and shaking hands and meet and greet and networking. And so that's kind of where I got my vision of I want to do something. I could do something with my life. You see all these people that have done, lawyers, doctors, accountants, business owners. And I started to realize maybe I could do something bigger than what I currently see. And then on top of that, managing a lot full of 300-400 cars kind of took a little bit of logistics and efficiency. And thinking through that kind of stuff was my first interaction with how can I make this better, this process better, the cars flow better, the members experience better, when a golf tournament is going on, we 100 cars show up at the same time. How do I make this so that nobody feels like they're flustering and they don't know where the car goes? So my brain started thinking of problem solving, and that was prior to Coyote. And so I think I just naturally always had this problem solving, toe tapping mindset. And so logistics was perfect to go into. So yeah, I started at Coyote. What was that? 2011. Went to the training class, hit the carrier floor, did the whole, traditional hot pod where you learn how to book carriers and talk to drivers. But yeah, for me, it was always about like kind of buoying up, making relationships with people, talking, flowing, like ease of doing business, and like creating what I coined the phrase later in my career, but I call them freight ships. So friendship through freight, where you're kind of like making friends. These people want to trust you to get the freight for their trucks, and like you become their friend, and you're doing business together. You might never even meet any of these people, but like become a friend through the phone. And so that was like part of my initial booking freight at Coyote, and learning where my drivers wanted to go, talking to them on the phone for sometimes hours at a time, just
Yeah.
understanding everything about that person. And that trust then becomes, lethal, because I was the guy that I didn't make a lot of phone calls. Actually, people got mad at me because, like, you traditionally, as a carrier sales rep, you're on a team of maybe 10 people or whatnot, and you got to blast the phones to cover the loads, right? Well, I was the guy that like would call, like, I had like 30 calls a day, but like if I needed to get a load covered, I'd call my guy and he would get me a truck. And they would always wonder why I could get the truck at the end of the day at 7 o'clock when everybody is 10 people have called 200 carriers, and I'm like, would phone a friend, and it's because you built such a deep relationship with these people, and like they trust you. And so that was like kind of where my logistics kind of, again, friendships and deep relationships and networking kind of like really took off at Coyote.
What I like about it is there are so many different ways to quote make it, and it usually has to make it long term. It has to be part of innately who you are, and so this curiosity that you're describing, or solving puzzles, trying to optimize a parking lot, is an innate interest, or and part of who you are. And then add on top of that an affinity towards people and relationships, and after a while it makes you make it look easy to other people, because you're just being your in a natural state. You're not trying. You're just doing what comes natural to you and what you were, born to do. And I see so many people that struggle because they're trying to be something that they're not, or they're trying to copy somebody else who's been successful and saying, "Oh, they did it that way, therefore I have to do it the same way." Well, I'm a different person. I have different skills. I have a different personality. I'm an introvert, for example. I don't like large parties and loud groups. I like smaller, more intimate conversations and quiet rooms. And that doesn't lend itself to a freight brokerage floor most of the time.
No,
And yet you can still be very successful being true to yourself.
I see that all the time. And I struggled with that too in my sales journey, thinking that I needed to sound a certain way or copy someone's pitch or why they did it this way or that way. And like I would fumble the words, or I'd practice in front of the mirror, like the elevator pitch. And like I would mess it up so many times. I'm like, dude, you got to just be yourself, man. And like
Mm.
once I realized that, like, the key to everything that I've ever accomplished in my life was like being me, like come from the heart, shoot them straight. Back to the valet thing really quick before we go on. So like the one year, it's 4th of July. I'm talking 600 cars pull up, and it's a shit show. It's a beautiful country club. Everybody goes there. They bring their guests. And so we're sweating out of our, ass, running up and down. It's chaotic. Cars are everywhere. And I wasn't the valet manager at the time. I was the valet lead or whatever. I was under someone else's tutelage. So the next year, I'm like, there's no way we're doing that again, guys. Cause like that was so unorganized. And like, we got to come up with a better system. And so as the cars started pulling up, I got promoted to valet manager. The cars started pulling up, and I started selling the members on what's called Easy Out. So I said, hey, we can either park your cars, the normal process. You get the ticket, and when the fireworks are over, you walk over with your ticket, and we'll go grab your car. It might take us 10, 15 minutes to grab it because we're running a quarter mile down there to get the car away at the end of the lot. or I can do easy out for you and your guests. Easy out, we're going to park your 3 cars, you and your 2 guest cars, in a line down the road over here, and you walkie-talkie up when you're ready. When you're done, your cars will be in a line, and they will. You pull up, your keys will all be in the cars already, and you can just take off. And so we sold easy out to, like, I'm not kidding, like 50 members that day. And so what ended up happening, they all paid. They were like, yeah, I don't want to wait in this line. Last year it was chaotic.
Mhm.
I'll give you $20 a car. Average tips $5. I'll give you $20 a car for easy out. Boom. So we lined up these cars, and we had 50 members or so that did that. But then what that ended up doing was then the rest of the cars could flow because 50 cars were, boom, took off so quick. So the transactional freight or cars was like flowing nicely, while the other ones kind of were like expedited. Get out of here. And so, like, after that, we're all looking at like the bags of money that we made in tips, and like, what, we all made like $100 an hour. Like, this is nuts. Like, and it was just a cool story of like thinking through a problem and coming up with a game plan and selling it to someone, and they all, members bought it and they loved it. So that was
Well,
like my
that's a
first. Yeah.
it's such a great example of systems thinking, where you can see the impact of changes on one of the parts to the system as a whole, and that's a gift. Not everybody has the ability to see with their mind's eye the pros and cons of decisions that you might make where there's a bottleneck here, or there's excess capacity there. And I mean, as a supply chain professional, there are few technical skills that are more valuable, because you're making decisions that impact 2 and 3 and 4 layers of effects after what you've just done. Were you a good student growing up? Did you do well in like math or sciences or art?
Grade school, I was in advanced math and that kind of stuff. But when I got into high school, I became more of the like the A B student who like figured out how to get good grades, but like didn't actually I wasn't book smart. I was people smart. Like,
Mm.
read the cliff notes. I can talk about what happened in the book. We'll get through high school. I think I had like a 3.6 GPA, but it was more like, I don't need to be the smartest kid in the class. I need to know how do I use this information to do something? And that's pretty much how my whole life has been.
Well, it sounds. I like to try to understand who somebody is, and what makes them tick. And as you're talking, I mean, you are a gentle spoken person. You're very thoughtful and strategic in what you do. How did you apply that to the early days of MoLo, which, startups are anything but predictable or gentle or quiet? They are
Yeah.
loosely organized train wrecks 7 days a week.
Yeah. So early MoLo, everybody's wearing a ton of hats. We're like running around with our heads chopped off. Just give a little background. So MoLo is what Andrew and Matt Vogich really drew up MoLo in the beginning, and then Will Jenkins and I jumped on board as co-founders. Andrew had a non-compete, so he had to sit out for an entire year. But Matt had a supply chain kind of background from IBM, and Will and I kind of grinded in freight at Coyote. So that was kind of like the squad that we started with. Matt kind of running point as the president, and Will and I the kind of the freight IQ guys. So like that was the 3 that started it, and then we slowly started adding, other carrier reps or ops reps, and slowly building it out. But like in the beginning, you don't have processes, you don't understand what is there's no right or wrong thing to do at the right time. You don't know how to get customers, you don't know how to get carriers. Everything is like a brand new thing each time. So it's really just like dividing and conquering. But what we realized after a while was like, everybody can't wear so many hats or we all won't
Mhm.
move forward. And so in the beginning
Because
stages,
you would then become the bottleneck.
yeah. And so like, again, early stage brokerage, you're, whatever it takes to cover a load, whatever it takes to get a driver on it or to land the customer, you're going to do it. You might be answering the phones late at night. You might be cutting the comm checks for the drivers, or setting up payables, this and that. Like everybody had to do a lot of things in the beginning, but for me, I originally was supposed to be doing the carrier side because like I had a lot of relationships, and I was booking freight, using the carriers that I had, the relationships that I had. Because one, you don't have good credit in the beginning of a brokerage, right?
Yeah.
So like carriers don't want to haul for you when you have a 0 credit rating, and so leveraging some carrier relationships that I had and some of the other early reps had was super helpful because we could be like, hey, you can count on me. Like, you use my character of how I always treated you to come through and pay you guys. And so you have to establish your credit. But that carrier relationshipy kind of trust that I had built on that side actually ended up pivoting me to go completely the other side and go customer. And I was not prepared for that. But a lot of people ask me all the time, like, how did you go from talking to drivers and carriers and all that to like completely 180 going to the customer side? So we could talk through that a little bit, but that was like the really early 6 months of MoLo. Really, in the beginning, was running around and getting it, whatever it took to get to launch it, and celebrating 5 loads a day, 10 loads a day, that kind of stuff. So it was like fun.
So then you spend a couple of years growing at a really high rate and adding new people, adding new customers. COVID obviously creates a amplified environment for everything. And then at some point you start to envision an exit, or maybe it was planned long in advance. Maybe the circumstances change and you say, hey, there's a window of opportunity we need to take advantage of. When did you first start thinking about the end?
Yeah, I think, in going back to the beginning, we didn't know that we wanted to build a massive brokerage. It wasn't like, hey, we're going to build this thing. It's like 100% huge. Like you don't know like how well it's going to go, but you kind of have to trust that like, I think we can do this. And then you start getting more, this is going to work. I know it's going to work. Wait, we might want to start thinking like what direction we want to take this thing. And a lot of that direction came when Andrew came over and became our CEO. I think at that point we were a year old, and he started laying more of a path forward of like, how quickly do we want to grow, what revenue targets, and a lot of that. And that's kind of when I went to the customer side full time, going and working with shippers and whatnot. But yeah, I think at that point you're scaling, and then you're thinking like, is this a business we want to exit in 4 or 5 years, or do we want to hold this thing long term? And then you're also contemplating, like, you're thinking about where the market's at, like for a brokerage, and all that stuff starts coming in. On top of that, like, you're thinking about your people, and you built this company and you care so much about them, and you never want to make it about an exit. You want it to be about building an awesome company and not about that. But like, you have to start thinking of those things along the way. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's just like we're doing this perfectly this way, we're going to sell it. Like, that's not really how it starts. You're trying to build a business that's successful in the beginning, and then over time it develops into what it becomes. It kind of morphs into what it should be. So,
And then you have the exit. I mean, people fantasize about that moment of, okay, it's finally happened. We've got a letter of intent signed by someone who might want to buy us, and then you get to the 1 yard line, and it's hard not to imagine, looking at a spreadsheet and thinking, oh, here's what that means for me, and here's what that means for all of us, and what it could mean for your family, and so on. And that has to be a highly charged period of time. I know buying and selling companies it can be a very emotional process. What stands out to you personally from that window?
yeah, I think we were prepared. We were in conversations of trying to find a partner to acquire us, and we also were looking at the route of either private equity or continuing to scale and going 600 million to a billion on our own. And when ArcBest came into the mix, I think at the time Jeff Silver was working with ArcBest on trying to work with Mastery and his TMS. And he was like, hey, MoLo is my son's company. They're truckload. What are you guys struggling with? So it was the right match. And that was a year-long process where you really look at everything to decide if this is the right fit. And, for us, and, Andrew and Matt did a really good job of making sure that we picked the right type of organization that would also care about the MoLo traditions and how we took care of our customers. That was really important throughout that whole process. But yeah, for me, when we got the call that it happened, I think my heart skipped a beat, to be honest, because I was like, whoa, like I've been waiting for a very long time, working so hard, not knowing if this will ever turn into anything. Because
Uh-huh.
I think naturally everybody who's never been a founder thinks that oh, I'm going to found this company and then I'm going to get this equity. And then of course this equity is going to mean something. And your equity doesn't equal anything until it does. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just a piece of paper that says you own a percentage of a company that's worth nothing, and you're working for it to hopefully be worth something one day. And so in the back of your mind, you're working towards a larger goal, but you don't actually know 100% if your business is going to be worth something until you get closer to somebody is actually thinking of buying you. And so I like to want to talk about that because the industry, a lot of people, I think about sales reps or executives, or they want to go to a company and they're like, oh, well, I got to get equity. I got to get it. And there's this fantasy over that equity also means a guaranteed payout or something. It only
Mm-hmm.
means something if the company becomes worth something. Otherwise it's worth nothing. And so it was a life-changing experience for me. Obviously my equity did become worth something because we did sell our company. But a lot of my success at MoLo was actually outside of the equity. It was me being a
Mm.
really good sales rep and taking care of customers. I sold, by the end, I was managing $150 million worth of freight spend, and 95% of it was closed by me. My best year, I did 58,000 truckloads. And so while the payout was great from an equity perspective, I made more money as a sales rep over the 5 years
Sure.
than I did as an equity shareholder. And so I want other people to remember that if you are cold and really good at your job, you can also make really, really good money in logistics, and you don't need to sit there at the table and argue 100% about how much equity you're going to get up front. Because that's a negotiation tactic in the beginning. But if you're in sales to make good money, and
Commissions,
you
yeah.
can equally do well in that as well. So I just wanted to draw the line and clarify that for everybody who thinks that is fantasizes over that.
Well, it's helpful because there is an exit fantasy that in some level is required to start a business. You have to have, or not, maybe not for everybody. Some people are build and then hold for life and pass on to multiple generations. So they're not thinking of an exit in that sense. But for a software or a SaaS founder, I think I read this stat last week, 94% of SaaS companies fail. So your equity when you get hired is likely worth
Worth
nothing. And
nothing.
the equity when that business eventually tapers off is also worth nothing. Yet the experience and the learning that you get along the way can be worth far more than an actual dollar amount. And yeah, there does need to be more balance in that conversation, because otherwise it can feel just purely motivated by greed, and that's not enough to sustain you, because when the money's not there, if you lose motivation, then you weren't really on board. You were just looking for a payday.
Right. And there's, there are people who are, call it what it is. You build a company because you want to make money. And I don't think that
Yeah.
there's anything wrong with that. I listen to a lot of podcasts about from some leaders that talk about hey, if you just want to get wealthy and, fat out rich, just say it and own that. And that's okay. You
Yeah.
might do better just saying that that's what you really want your life to be. For me, I cared tremendously about MoLo, the people, the experience, the customers. I got so ingrained in that. That became my identity of we're building this thing, and everybody cared so much about it. But yeah, I also saw it as an opportunity hey, this equity will potentially be worth something one day. I don't know if it will or not, but along the way, let me make some good money, like selling and taking care of customers. So that's why it was a no brainer for me to go the customer side, because I saw that we were going to be a successful company, and like, why
Huh?
not be the one that closed the largest deals, and yeah, and be the face of that, and like sponsor that from a kind of founder sales like role. And so I leaned into that as much as I could. And I even had some people come to me at the end like, well, you were the founder. That's one of the founders. That's why you were successful in sales. And I was like, that's a title that's on my email, but like every one of my customers, and as when I exited, were like, we loved working with you. Like, you were
Mm-hmm.
awesome, and like, we can't wait to see what you do next. Take your time off of your family. And like, so it was deeper than just like a pure sales relationship. I like, kind of like how I talked about with my carriers. It was very like, my customers I knew personally, like, we were friends, and we're still friends. And like, that's how I
Certainly.
led. And like, and I realized this industry is very relational driven. It's very subjective. Everybody has their own opinion of what's good or bad, and they like who they like,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't like who they like. And like, you could be the best company in the world, but if they don't like the sales rep, they won't do business with it. And I think once you realize that, it's more about a people game, because anyone can pick up loads. You got to play
Yeah.
the people game all day. So I would always play the person and not the actual loads, because MoLo moved
Situation. Yeah.
loads. MoLo moved loads. Stephan builds relationships. And that was my game.
You mentioned the word identity a minute ago. Now that you're exited and you don't have a job, you're at home, you're a new father. How do you think about your identity now versus a couple of years ago?
It's been a tough time, I would say. As much as I left, and I was very thankful for, everything, what we built, and the camaraderie, and just like celebrating it all. It was also challenging to leave something that like was my entire life. Like, I
Mm.
love that company. I left it all on the field. I love my customers, the people. And so once you kind of rip that away from you, there is like a void inside of you.
Mm.
And then there's also like, you have freight brain, right? Like, I think I was getting 2,000 emails a day at some point. So I just needed to give my brain a rest from like the hustle and bustle of freight. But yeah, there it definitely was, an interesting transition, but I'm thankful to have gotten the opportunity to exit on a good note and say goodbye to everybody. Kind of get like almost like a farewell tour of like, hey,
Hmm.
I'm taking off, guys. I trust you guys to keep running this race. I had accomplished everything that I wanted to as a sales rep, as a co-founder. I learned so much, and I was like, you guys keep running this race. Like, my
I'm
customers
going to
love
take a
me. I
break.
made sure they all were going to stick with us, and they I think they have. And but yeah, for me, it was like, now it's time to focus on my family. Like, be at home, be present. My relationship with my wife. I had a kid on the way, and that becomes quickly your new life, right? Like,
Hmm.
what's most important to you? During the MoLo years, I was 28, young, single with a dog. I met my wife about a year in, and I told her like, I'm building this company right now. So like,
Hmm.
you're not second, but like, life is going to be a little bit hectic for a while. And so now that I'm out of those walls, it's like, family becomes first. I get to hang out with my kids. He'll be 2, and then I have a 7-week-old son, and I'm at home right now figuring out what's next with my life. So
Well,
very
certainly
blessed.
probably not
Yeah.
sleep.
Not sleeping. That's a challenge. The first son slept through the night, no problem. Second one is like, playing around a little bit, but I think actually last night he turned a corner, so we're like, fingers crossed.
Well, and fatherhood is such a joy. Mine are all older. I've got 4 teenagers and a couple that have left for college. And man, I miss those days of the toddler waiting by the door when you come in, home from work, and they're just so excited to see you. And you're going to be a hero for, I don't know, probably another 7 to 12 years, and then they become full people themselves. And I'm really happy that you get to experience that fully committed to it without having to have all of the other things, and yet simultaneously knowing how your mind works and how you're motivated. I know you're not going to be able to be on the sidelines for long. So when you start imagining the future, what comes to mind?
I mean, you're spot on with that. It was intentional for me that like I knew that I was going to exit at some point because I wanted to just take a break and be around my kids. And so like that timeline accelerates when you start seeing how fast a kid grows up, right? And so I always wanted to be a really present parent. That's one of my life goals. And you know, I've always said too, like if my kids want to play sports, like I want to be at every single game if I can. Like I don't want to miss a game because I have to work. And so like I trying to map out what my life will look like where prioritizing family comes first. I can't, obviously I do have that mindset where I'm toe tapping and I have to figure out what's next for me. Like that's just my personality, but I need to build whatever is built next needs to be built around my family first. And like that is my number one priority. So it's challenging, but
So do you
I'm
like sit
working for
down
that
with
process.
do you just sit down with a blank piece of paper then, and like here's an idea, there's an idea, and here's a potential path? How do you explore possibilities when it's so open ended?
There's no perfect way to do that. And it's actually a bit overwhelming if I'm being honest. I've looked at everything. I do have a passion for real estate. I've always loved real estate. I think I could do really well in that. I've looked at franchising, recruiting, staying somewhere in the industry, selling a different product for something else. But, also thinking about like, okay, there's a quote on my board over here that's like your kids, the most pivotal time is when your kids are 1 to 4 years old. That's when they like form
Mm-hmm.
their identity of like
Mm-hmm.
security and their parents are around and they trust. So like I have to do something where I can be around my kids while they go through those pivotal years. And so like
You
that
should
kind
start a
of narrows
podcast.
the window from like this to like this. And then as they get older, maybe I want to go and be a CEO or do something bigger or grander. But like right now it's kind of like it's either building something where it's not as crazy as like Freight is, because Freight's nuts founding a company, or just something with a little more work-life balance. But I'm kind of an open slate right now.
I was just interviewing Chris Heffernan with Delivered earlier this week, and he shared that one of the things that he remembers the most about his own childhood was that his dad came to every single game. And his dad was an entrepreneur, and he prioritized family life whenever he possibly could. And Chris is, I think he's in his late 30s, and that time period of his life was so impactful that on a random podcast, that came out. And so to get to hear the opposite side of it, a father talking about being that for his kids in back-to-back interviews, is two really neat bookends of people that obviously care about other people and have something bigger or deeper than just the business or just entrepreneurship. I mean, I love supply chain. I have dedicated my career to this industry, and I love being around entrepreneurs. I just get so inspired, and hearing these stories and sharing them is such an honor and a privilege. And but there's more to it than that. That's not enough to just sustain. Doing a podcast can be a grind, and there's no doubt.
Yeah.
But the deeper things beneath that are, I want to do some good in the world, and our industry is, maybe I'll say politely, pretty rough and tumble. It's not always the most progressive mindset. There's some really awful things that happen in our business, and we have an opportunity. Anybody with influence, no matter how small, to be a light in some of those places. And to me, that's the bigger purpose behind why I do all of this is there's a chance to impact people in the way that I'm able to, which is a different way than you're able to. And if we all rally together and do that in a somewhat of a shared direction or a set of shared values, not only is it just enjoyable, it's a fun way to be, but
easier, yeah.
it is satisfying and less frictional. And you're actually doing something that matters. Because at the end of the day, I need to know that what I do matters. And if it doesn't, then I can't keep doing it.
Man, you just hit on so many points. 100% on what you just ended on, but I'm going to go back to the father thing. So I know my dad wished he could have been at all my games, but
Uh,
he couldn't. He worked 2 jobs. My mom was working. So a lot of times I was looking in the stands and my parents weren't there. So that was tough to go through as a kid. And so that was a defining moment for me that I was like, I made a pact to myself when I was 16. Like, I'm never gonna not miss one of my kids' games if they want to play
mm,
sports. And so that's been one of my guiding stars my entire life. Like, I need to figure out whatever career path I take so that by the time my kid wants to do this, like, I can be there every step of the way. If he says he wants to be a baseball player when he grows up, cool. I'm going to work my entire life to figure out how you can have a shot at playing in the majors if that's what you want, or like football. I
yeah.
mean, whatever it is. And my little guy right now is saying play golf with Dada. And I'm like, yes, like, I'm in on that. Like, whatever, let's go. Let's ride with that. But yeah, like, I'm looking so forward to my relationship with my kids and getting to like just be their hero and be that dad. And I know my dad sees that in me. He's like, man, my dad did as best he could and wish he could have spent more time with me and my sports and all of that. But I'm excited to be able to do that for my kids. And you said something about like leaving, making the industry a better place and, like paying it forward, so to speak, or like, that's something that I think about a lot. I think about, because it is such a hustle and bustle industry where a lot of times it's like, it's moving and shaking. There's constantly things going on. And it's not always progressing as fast as it should. And honestly, a lot of times it's just like about numbers and money, like loads, money,
Mhm.
revenues, freight spend, RFPs, like how much commission checks. I think that's like a lot of what it is. And it's good. Obviously, people make money and companies grow and all of that. That's exciting. But I think there's a missing void in the industry of like progress on the actual industry, not on the like what's going on, but like how can
Mhm.
you work on it? Just like imagine if you were to take yourself out of your role as a logistics manager for a second while your freight's still going on and you just worked on the industry over here, like working not in the business but on the business. And
Yes.
imagine if like, I don't know, 100 transportation managers were like, we're going to take 3 months away from this. I'm going to set it over here. And we're just going to work on how to make this a better place. Like, no one ever does that or like stops for a second and like, actually, what would make this a better ecosystem? How would we do this better so that like we're all just
Yes.
not running around with our heads chopped off all the time, and every three years the freight changes hands and and like that's something that I think about a lot because, right, like my mind is thinking about like the bottleneck and the problem.
Mhm.
The bigger problem is that like we're constantly like patching the hole in the boat when the water's leaking in. It's like, oh, someone fixes that little thing. Oh, we fixed that little thing. But is anybody like fixing the entire thing, or is it more just like, I created a better version of the thing we used to do, and now we're going to use this thing? But like,
You've just
are
given
they?
me a whole new picture to orient myself around. I mean, I've heard the phrase 1,000 times to, don't work in the business, work on the business. I don't think I've ever heard somebody say, uh, focus on working on the industry, not in the industry. And that ecosystem, and that's just a really concise way of describing for me, in part what I've been trying to do. I just didn't have the right language for it. And thank you for that. That's uh, another coordinate that I can navigate towards now.
Licensing
Let's work
agreement from Shark Tank.
the
A dollar for
the
everything you sold.
Bootstrapper's Guide to Logistics. Copyrighted Stephan
Yeah.
Mathis,
No, it's
2024.
well, I think I got that from actually inside of MoLo because I was an individual contributor for a long time. That a big portion of my contribution to MoLo was working in the business, taking care of customers, taking care of making sure we were a profitable company, making sure that like our customers are taken care of. That's a role in itself. And it's maybe different than just being like a chief officer who's
Mm-hmm.
managing people, like managing the customers and making sure they stick and you have revenue and freight coming back and forth is a job in and of itself. And so, but like, yeah, the phrase is, do you want to work in the business or do you want to work on the business? Typically people who have the larger roles, the VPs, the chiefs and all that, they work on the business, and then you're someone who works in it. And so for me, I look at like, I'm outside of this. I'm not in freight today. I'm not reading all the emails anymore, but like my whiteboard is full of like, what is going on in this industry that's a problem that like no one's really addressing, or they're kicking the can down the road, or they maybe like fixed it. Oh, it's a little better than the thing that was before, but like, is anybody like calmly looking at like the problems and like creating a way better solution than what we've been doing? Because that's like where my mind thinks. I mean, I'm blessed to have a break to not be in it right now, but like,
Yeah.
that's how my mind thinks. Like, there's probably better ways to do a lot of what we do if you stopped. But freight doesn't stop.
At this
So,
pit stop that you're in right now, that is the unstructured free time is sometimes what it takes or requires to be able to be creative. It's hard to be creative when you're getting punched in the face. And to be able to step back and look at the industry as a whole and undergird that with what matters most to you and your family right now. I'm just really happy for you that you've done the work, and then you've found yourself in a position that you put yourself in to be able to have that luxury, because it's a huge luxury and it's a privilege that I know you don't take lightly. Whatever the next thing is, when you narrow it down and you've done the math and you've process mapped out how you think you could go about tackling that problem, we'd love to have you back on and help you promote it and talk about it and share what it is that you're building, because second time founders have a huge advantage. You've been through the grind, you've been through the build, and it's never the same way twice. You're going to learn new things and make a whole new set of mistakes. And I want our listeners to be able to learn from that and to grow as a result. So thanks for opening up and going deep today. I know that's in your nature, and that's why I enjoy talking with you so much. Is it's not surface stuff. This is real, genuine life.
I think if I could give any piece of advice to anyone who sells anything, like, you got to be vulnerable and like open up. Let the other person see who you are. Be a human. They're a human. And like, you break down that judgment on a sales call really quickly by just being like, hey, we're just chatting here. I'm trying to get to know you personally, like figure out if we could work together. That was what I did very well, was just like chop it up and like talk the talk for a little bit. And then we got into like how we could do business together. But like, vulnerability is key in sales if you want to build strong relationships that last and not transactional ones, and making it just about the freight or the money or all that. But yeah, thanks for having me on, for sure. I like talking to you. We kind of have a similar personality where you want to get to know the other person and really be genuine about it. And like, that's the type of people that I want to talk to.
Same.
Being a SaaS founder is much different. That's something that I'm like contemplating, and if I decide to go that route. So I'm definitely going to need to learn all of that. But I think I have enough freight IQ and like tribal knowledge of how this industry works that I could be dangerous in building something that could make it more efficient. So like, that's where my gut instinct is right now, but it's going to take a while to get there. So,
Well,
would
best
definitely
of luck
love
to you.
be back on the show and keep chatting with you guys.
Yeah, best of luck to you on this discovery phase. Best of luck to you as a young family. I'm so happy to hear where you're at, and we're all rooting for you.
Man, I appreciate that. It's like a cheer squad. Let's go. No, it's cool.
Hey, that's what we're all about, man, is
go.
encourage people, support people, lift each other up.
I want to see people
if
win,
we all,
though. Like, I don't feel like
Yeah.
I'm a prodigy or somebody that like did something like I mean, I was successful in what I did, but like, it was really about challenging myself to something that was very hard and putting myself into a uncomfortable position to grow. And I think more people need to take the hard road and try something that is scary to find out that it's actually not as scary once you get past it. And then you get confidence, and then you start doing more scary things. And then everything that's ever scary, you realize like I can overcome this thing. And so like, that's where my mind is today. I'm no longer scared of something. Like, I know it'll take a lot of work, but I can do it. And I think other people need to get that mindset and not set their bar so low.
Yeah. Well, and that's even in our tagline for the show is how we want to inspire others to take the leap. And that leap doesn't mean you have to start a company. That leap is whatever's standing in front of you that you're afraid of. It could be talking to your boss about a promotion. It could be asking the girl to dance, at a junior high dance,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Like you take that leap, because the reward on the other side of fear is far greater than the thing that you're afraid of itself. And we're all on our own journey, and we're all at different places. And that's what makes this so fun, to not have to do it alone.
I just want to say something quickly too. So fear is a big motivator for me. I'm a 6 Enneagram. If you're familiar with the Enneagram test, it kind of talks about your personality and like really why you think the way that you do. It's like very spot on. Take the test. You'll get a number and it'll tell you everything about your personality. And then you'll start reading and you're like, holy crap, this is exactly who I am. So 6s are naturally motivated by fear, insecurity, and risk, and having like an exit plan and strategy. So they're always planning for the worst case scenario. And so while I have that in my mind, fear is like a motivator because I'm actually scared. But then I love the rush of like overcoming the fear too. I have the like both sides of like, oh my God, that was awesome. Like I did that. And so I'm sure other people can relate to that a little bit, but like fear is just something you got to tackle it and put it in the front seat with you and buckle it in. And like, we're going to go on the ride until I'll drop you off somewhere and then keep going.
This is maybe the only place you're going to find freight, founders and self-discovery all in one place. Thanks everybody for sticking with us and listening as we try to grow more awareness of the founders in our industry that, like I say, if you have a job, if you're a W-2 employee and you work at a business and supply chain, that was started by a founder. And whether it's, C.H. Robinson, that's been around for 119 years, which was started by a dude, or you're at a startup with 3 people and no customers yet. If you work for a for-profit organization, there's a founder that started that, and we all owe something as a result of that. And so we just want to keep sharing stories like this and inspiring others to take that leap, and connecting founders to other founders, and just being a voice for good in a big, complicated but relational industry at the end of the day. So, Stephan, best of luck to you again, and let's catch up in a year and hear where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Bootstrapper's Guide to Logistics, and a special thank you to our sponsors and the team behind the scenes who make it all possible. Be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to the podcast to get the latest updates. To learn more about the show and connect with the growing community of entrepreneurs, visit logisticsfounders.com. And of course, thank you to all the founders who trust us to share their stories.